Right now, while you are reading this, something is happening that you cannot feel, cannot stop, and have almost certainly decided not to think about. Your life is being spent, not saved, not paused, not waiting for you to be ready. Spent. Second by second, without asking your permission, without sending a warning, without caring at all whether you were using it well or wasting it on something that will mean nothing in 10 years. And the terrifying part is not that this is happening. The terrifying part is that you already knew this, and it still has not changed anything. That is the most uncomfortable truth about time. It is not the shortage of it that destroys people. It is the numbness to it. The strange, specific human ability to understand intellectually that life is short while feeling in every lived moment that there is still plenty left. You know the statistics. You have heard the quotes. You have probably felt the fear at 2 a.m. when the room was quiet and the performance of your daily life had stopped for long enough to let reality in. And then morning came, and the feeling passed, and the calendar filled back up, and the urgency disappeared as completely as if it had never existed. This is not weakness. It is something built into the way human beings experience time. The brain is not designed to feel the passage of years the way it feels the passage of seconds. A year does not hurt the way a burn hurts. Losing a decade does not announce itself the way losing your keys does. And so people move through enormous stretches of their lives without the felt sense that anything is actually being lost. They are busy, they are tired, they are managing things. They will get to the important parts later. Later is a word that has consumed more human potential than failure ever could. More than fear, more than circumstance. Later is the most expensive word most people will ever speak, and they use it every day without noticing the bill accumulating. Marcus Aurelius was one of the most powerful men who ever lived. He commanded an empire. He had every resource, every luxury, every reason to believe that time was on his side. And yet he wrote in private, for no audience, words that sound like a man standing at the edge of something. Confine yourself to the present, not the future, not the grand plan, not the version of your life that will begin once the conditions are finally right. The present, because he understood something that his position made visible in a way most people never experience. The present is the only place where life is actually occurring. Everything else is either memory or projection. And a man who lives primarily in either of those places is not really living at all. He is rehearsing, he is reviewing, but he is not here. Think about the last year of your life, not in general. Specifically, what did you build? What did you begin? What conversation did you have that changed something real? What fear did you walk toward instead of away from? What version of yourself emerged in the last 12 months that did not exist in the 12 before? For most people, the honest answer to those questions produces a specific kind of silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that arrives when you realize the year passed and the life inside it was not quite the one you intended, not dramatically wrong, just slightly off, slightly smaller, slightly more managed and slightly less lived. And then another year begins, and the intention resets, and the same gentle drift continues. Seneca saw this with a clarity that has not aged at all. He wrote more than 2,000 years ago that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it. He was not being harsh, he was being precise. He had watched men of enormous intelligence and ambition spend their entire lives managing appearances, accumulating things they did not need, postponing the life they actually wanted in favor of the life that looked acceptable from the outside. And by the time they arrived at old age, if they arrived, the things they had put off had become impossible. Not because of age, because the habit of postponement had become the architecture of their existence. They no longer knew how to begin. They had practiced waiting for so long that action felt foreign. Here is the specific thing that time does to people who are not paying attention. It does not take from them dramatically. It does not arrive at the door and announce its presence. It works through substitution. The years of your 20s, where real foundations could have been laid, get substituted with preparation for living. The decade of your 30s, where the things you built in your 20s could have compounded, get substituted with managing the consequences of what you did not build. The 40s arrive, and the window on certain possibilities begins to close, not with a slam, but with the soft, barely audible click of a door that has been drifting shut for years. And at each stage, the person inside is still telling themselves the same story. That there is still time, that the important things will still get done, that this current period of waiting and managing and preparing is temporary, and the real life is still ahead. The real life is not ahead. This is it. This conversation you are having with yourself right now. This is the real life. The Tuesday morning when nothing remarkable is scheduled, that is not the time between living. That is the living. And what you do with ordinary, unmemorable days is what determines the shape of everything. Not the occasional moments of clarity or crisis or inspiration. The daily texture of how you spend the hours that feel like they do not matter is exactly what your life is made of. Epictetus, who had nothing in the conventional sense, who owned no property and was owned himself, understood something about time that free men with abundant resources consistently miss. He understood that the only moment you will ever have any real power over is the one you are currently in. Not tomorrow, not the ideal version of next year. Now. And a man who grasps that fully, who feels it not as a philosophical concept, but as a physical fact, moves differently. He does not wait for motivation, because he understands that motivation is a product of action, not a prerequisite for it. He does not wait for the right conditions, because he understands that conditions are rarely right, and the gap between imperfect conditions and no conditions is enormous. He acts in the imperfect present, because the imperfect present is the only present there is. The reason most people do not feel the urgency of time is that urgency is uncomfortable, and the human mind is extraordinarily skilled at converting discomfort into abstraction. The knowledge that you are mortal becomes a philosophical fact rather than a lived reality. The understanding that years are passing becomes a background awareness rather than a foreground alarm. And this conversion is so seamless, so automatic, that most people do not notice it happening. They do not feel themselves choosing numbness. They simply find, over and over, that the urgency never quite arrives. That the moment of reckoning is always slightly further down the road. That there is still enough time to begin tomorrow. There is a particular kind of grief that arrives in men who lived most of their life in that tomorrow. It is not the grief of dramatic failure. It is quieter and in some ways worse. It is the grief of competence, of a life managed well from the outside, bills paid and responsibilities met, and nothing catastrophically wrong, but something central missing. Something that the person knew was possible, knew was in them, knew was waiting for a moment of proper beginning, that never quite arrived. That grief does not announce itself in a single moment. It accumulates the way sediment does, layer by layer, imperceptibly, until one day the weight of it is unmistakable. You do not have to arrive there. That is the point, not as a comforting statement, but as a precise one. The path that leads to that grief is visible right now if you are willing to look at it directly. It is made of the same material as today, the same small choices to defer, to manage, to wait, to keep the real things at a comfortable distance where they cannot demand anything from you yet. And the path that leads somewhere different is also made of today, of the same ordinary hours, the same imperfect conditions, the same tired Tuesday mornings. The difference is not in the day, it is in what you decide the day is for. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. But before the strength comes, the realization. And the realization is this: the outside events you are waiting for before you begin are not coming. The perfect moment does not arrive. The right time does not announce itself. The ideal conditions are a story you are telling yourself to make the postponement feel reasonable. And while you tell that story, the only thing that is genuinely yours, the only resource that does not replenish, the only currency that cannot be earned back once spent, is leaving, quietly, without drama, without apology. The clock is not loud. That is the problem. If you could actually hear it, if each hour made a sound as it closed, if every morning began with an honest accounting of how many remained, the urgency would not require a video or a philosophy or a 2 a.m. crisis to generate. It would be present in every moment. You would not need to be reminded that the life you are not living is still being counted against you. But the clock is quiet, and so the reminder has to come from somewhere else. From the part of you that already knows, the part that felt it at 2 a.m. and then let the morning take it away, the part that has read things like this before and nodded and then returned to the same day in the same way. That part of you is right. It has always been right. The question is never whether you know. The question is whether you will act as though you do. Begin. Not tomorrow. Not after the conditions improve. Not when you feel ready, because readiness is a feeling that follows action, not one that precedes it. Now, while the knowing is still fresh, while the quiet alarm is still audible, before the morning comes and takes it away again. The time you have is enough to do something real with, but only if you start treating it like it is what it actually is. The only thing you will never get back.